Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer. Hope you're all doing very well today, and we are here to ask and hopefully to answer one very simple question. Rankle, Master of Pranks. Will he rock? Let's find out. Okay, so a lot of people have been asking me about this fellow, do you think he's good? Should we play him? Should we be starting to drop lists with him? So, I didn't know if I was going to dedicate an entire video to him. Didn't really plan to, but then again, I was expecting more spoilers to be out by now. We got Rankle, among many other spoilers, dropped on Wednesday. Today is Friday. There was nothing yesterday, nothing today, probably nothing over the full weekend. I imagine the spoilers will begin in earnest on Monday, so hey, people are thirsty for the spoilers. They got a taste already, so why not talk about this guy? And yeah, there's a lot to break down here, so we're just going to go line by line. Okay, so right out of the gates, we do have a CMC of 2 colorless, 2 black, which of course is kind of at the top end of any BGX curve, just about, but also a very friendly casting cost, like John Dabs and Sultai, and of course Rock can all swing double black by turn 4 quite easily, so no worries there. He is legendary, so also worth noting, certainly that's at least a minor incentive against playing multiples. But down to brass tacks, we've got a 3/3 flying haste. So right out of the gates, you think of a similar card in the vein of Mantis Rider. Mantis Rider, despite seeing play in a top-tier deck, 5-color humans, is not a particularly playable modern power level card in its own right, outside of the human shell, with the tribal synergies that it gets. So even though 3/3 flying haste, these look like respectable stats, we are a tier below Mantis Rider as a body with Rankle for sure, because not only do we cost 1 more, we also don't have Vigilance. So 3/3 flying haste for 4, not particularly impressive. However, I will make one caveat, and that is the fact that the core green-black cards, we don't really have much flying, and we don't really have any haste to speak of on playable cards. The only haste threat that the core green-black cards really bring to bear in mid-range decks is an occasional one of Nissa Vital Force, and she's even pricier than Rankle, so, let's not totally discount the fact that he does have evasion, he does have haste. If the format is slower and fairer and there are more planeswalkers that we need to pressure, well, that's pretty good. That said, there is a major glaring exception in the BGX color pool for Jund, who already has Bloodbraid Elf that gives you direct card advantage while being a similarly sized haste threat. Admittedly, Bloodbraid Elf does not fly, right? But anyway, that's, so Rankle, flying haste 3/3, that's all well and good. Again, a little bit underpowered just in terms of the pure stats and the keywords, disregarding the on-hit ability here. Now, the final thing to mention before we do talk about said ability is that Rankle dies to every form of common removal in this format. Now, some people say, he dies to Bolt, he's a 4-drop, that's unplayable. Others will say, so many staples across all formats, die to removal, dying to removal is not an argument. Of course, it's a little bit, you need to factor it all in. You really need to factor it all in. Yes, it is bad logic to dismiss a card simply because it dies to most forms of removal. However, it is also bad logic to not factor that in whatsoever, and it's a pretty big issue, frankly, that Rankle dies to a Revolted Fatal Push, as well as to bolts and similar bolt-style effects, including Lightning Helix, Anger of the Gods, and of course to Path to Exile, and doesn't have any particular protection from any of them. And so especially when you factor in that Rankle needs to actually connect in order to get any value, that's a real downside. But anyway, that's that, and let's talk about these abilities. Okay, so whenever Rankle Master of Pranks deals combat damage to a player, choose any number. Now, it is worth noting that I mentioned one of the upsides to having this flying haste potential threat in our deck is that it can pressure opposing planeswalkers better than perhaps other threats in our deck can, but do note that you don't get this on-hit trigger if you do, so that's pretty rough. A little bit of a non-bow there in terms of realistic use cases for this card. But then let's also pay attention to the wording here, choose any number. So you can choose 0 of these, 1, 2, or all 3 of these. You cannot choose the same mode more than once. That would be obviously a little bit broken. But yeah, so you can do any number of the following if you successfully connect with Rankle. You can have each player discard a card. You can have each player lose 1 life and draw a card. Or you can have each player sacrifice a creature. So right out of the gates, this feels very iconically black, right? It feels very iconically mid-rangey and black, to be more exact. Of course, the symmetrical discard is very reminiscent of Liliana of the Veils +1, who is the single most iconic card for black mid-range decks in Modern. The next ability feels rather like a symmetrical Phyrexian Arena. Of course, it has echoes of Dark Confidant and other card advantage engines, but it's a closest approximation of again, a symmetrical Arena. And finally, we have a symmetrical Edict effect that is not in Modern, but if it was, it would be this card here, Innocent Blood. So that is what Rankle brings to the table. So the upside on this card is immense. It is immensely high. The ceiling is immensely high. But is it really as good as it seems on any kind of a regular basis? My friends, I am skeptical. So first of all, each player discarding a card, that's all well and good. Again, Liliana's +1 puts us on the road to victory in a lot of games. But, she would not see play in our deck whatsoever if she didn't have her -2 and her -6. So a mere symmetrical discard is kind of a plan B, or kind of a floor for Liliana. We really want to Edict with her and get our hand empty and then start ticking up. Rankle's ability to leverage this almost makes more sense in a deck that's more likely to dump its hand out and then use him as a curve topper in a way to continue disrupting slower mid-range and control decks by connecting and forcing discard and pressuring their life total. Without Liliana's other effects, she would just basically be a Necrogen Mists. And that is not a playable card in BGX midrange unless you're looking for a budget replacement for Liliana, perhaps. Now, the second ability, each player loses 1 life and draws a card. So, because you have to do things in order, you cannot get your way around the downside of the opponent drawing a card by first choosing to have both players draw, then having both players discard. Like, let's say you had 3 cards in hand, you could get some card selection out of that, and if the opponent's tapped out, they just draw their card, then lose it. That's not how this works. So, each player losing 1 life and drawing a card, I think this ability is a trap. I think it makes us want to read the card and say, look at all the things it does, and it can draw us cards. But realistically speaking, it seems so bad in most cases to play this guy, hope he connects, and then to give the opponent a card draw afterwards, just to draw cards of our own. Now, again, you can construct scenarios in which this will be great, like maybe they tap out, maybe you've drawn a dead discard spell for your draw step, and then you're like, okay, so I'm going to connect with Rankle, and then I'm going to have us both draw, and then I'm going to get them with my discard while they're tapped out. It's going to line up perfectly. There will be scenarios, of course, where something like that happens, but realistically speaking, I think this mode is actually rather bad, and I think it runs counter to most of what the rest of our attrition-based deck is up to. I really don't think we'll want to use this mode very often. I don't think it will be correct to use this mode very often. And if that's true, then this card loses a lot of potential power. Finally, we've got this Innocent Blood style effect, and look, again, there are scenarios in which this is great. Like, let's say Dark Confidant pulled us really far ahead, but our life total's so low he's a liability. Well, then you can connect with Rankle. The opponent's got a single really high-value creature on the field, but one that can't block Rankle. You connect, you Edict away their creature, you Edict away your own Bob, and life is good. Realistically speaking, especially in the Rock, we do not play expendable creatures. Bobs who are past their sell-by date notwithstanding, we don't play expendable creatures. So, again, it looks good, like it's great to have a potential repeatable edict. It doesn't target, doesn't, Leyline of Sanctity doesn't stop it, but I mean, we just don't have creatures in the rock to throw away to this guy's on-hit ability, that's for sure. Who does he think he is, right? If you're on Abzan with Lingering Souls, that might change the equation a little bit. And even, in Jund, okay, maybe your Bloodbraid has already gotten value, but we're talking about, already being many, many turns deep in the game. It's just not that realistic that we can truly leverage this Edict effect all that well. So we mentioned Abzan and Jund, and we'll talk about those a little bit later at the end of the video, and we'll also touch on Sultai, but first let's figure out whether this guy can rock, whether we can play him in Golgari midrange, and ultimately, my answer is going to be probably not. I said similar things about Yawgmoth in Modern Horizons, and I've said similar things about most other value-oriented curve toppers. It's like, look, we tend to win or lose the game based on how well our early turns line up, how well our disruption lines up, whether we can stick a Dark Confidant, whether we can have a Liliana of the Veil going uncontested, whether Tarmogoyf is good in the matchup, and whether the opponent can even handle a Tarmogoyf. So yes, you could get there with a different curve topper than what is stock. You can play Yawgmoth, and sometimes it will be better than more traditional curve toppers, but more often it will probably be worse, and really it will not always be that material to your victory or lack thereof in a game. And I think the closest comparison we could make to Rankle right now is Kalitas. They would be competing for similar slots, and to me, there's probably not that much of a comparison. Kalitas has similar issues to Rankle in that he does not tend to get value before the opponent has a chance to remove him. Very long games where you have excess mana notwithstanding and everything lines up well. But at least Kalitas does not die to many damage spells that are common, right? So Kalitas does have that going for him. And if you untap with Kalitas, look, you're making zombies, you're gaining life, you are potentially playing combat tricks and or cashing in excess tokens that are outclassed to make Kalitas even better and to gain even more life. And in the matchups where he's good, like against Dredge, if it's a close game, the game's going long, you untap with Kalitas, you have some removal in hand, you've just basically buried them. Same thing with Burn, same thing with a lot of the Ether Vial decks. The advantage of Kalitas is often insurmountable very, very quickly, and it is all asymmetrical. It is all pure value for us, making no concessions to the opponent. Whereas Rankle, again, he's more flexible. He is more likely to connect. Like with Kalitas, you do have to play him and hope you're going to get to untap with him. With Rankle, no, you can more often anyway connect the turn he comes down and get value the turn he comes down. But again, these modes, I don't think the modes are as good as they look. I think the best one is each player discards a card. And realistically speaking, that is kind of only good against decks that are as slow or slower than us, which on the Rock I don't think is all that many decks in the format. And again, right now in the current meta, we've got Burn as the very top deck to beat according to MTG Goldfish at the time of this recording. The lifelink alone of Kalitas is a big, big appeal. He allows us to be hedged against graveyard decks without committing too many slots to them because, of course, we don't want to or need to any longer. I just see Kalitas as a better curve topper and a better fit for the metagame. So is Rankle unplayably bad in Rock? No, I don't think so. I think he might be worth messing around with and experimenting with, and there are definitely far worse 4-drop curve toppers you could play with. But ultimately, will I be replacing Kalitas with Rankle anytime soon? I do not think so. So even though, my friends, my verdict is probably not for the question, will Rankle rock, I do want to touch on the other BGX archetypes because I'm dabbling more into those lately. I know a lot of my viewers main Jund or Abzan or Sultai. So I did already talk about Jund, how Rankle competes with Bloodbraid Elf. I don't think there's a world in which you're playing like a fifth Bloodbraid Elf basically in the form of Rankle. I just don't think Modern's that slow where you can pack all that many 4-drops. And I find it hard to believe that Rankle would outclass Bloodbraid Elf on average. So, maybe you could, for fun, and just to mix things up, play this as kind of your fourth Bloodbraid Elf, but I don't think that's particularly wise, personally speaking. On Sultai, we do have maybe a slightly higher density of expendable creatures. I'm thinking of Snapcaster Mage. You get the value out of your Snap, and then you can more freely edict away a Snapcaster Mage to make Rankle's third ability better. Okay, fine. That's definitely true. So, in these senses, I think Rock tends to have the fewest expendable creatures and is therefore the worst home for Rankle, so maybe Jund or Sultai might look a little bit more favorably on him, but even so, I don't necessarily see it there. But I do think that if there were a shell that could give Rankle the highest chance of succeeding in a modern BGX deck, it would be Abzan. We already mentioned the presence of Lingering Souls, making the Edict effect a lot more appealing. For that matter, Lingering Souls also makes the first ability, the Symmetrical Discard, much more appealing because, of course, hopefully, the opponent is pitching something that they get no value out of once it hits the graveyard, whereas we on Abzan could pitch a Lingering Souls and then flash it back and get value out of the back half. And there are some open questions in Abzan right now as to how good Dark Confidant is. I'm personally playing 2, and I've been having a lot of good success with those 2. But, how good is Bob? How good is Tracker in Abzan? These are open questions alongside Stoneforge Mystic. So perhaps Abzan's card advantage path is less clear than in other archetypes. Therefore, maybe even though I think it's still kind of a trap, maybe Rankle's second ability is a little bit more appealing in Abzan, just as kind of a flex potential card advantage source. And finally, of course, Abzan packing the Stoneforge package, packing the swords well. Something with flying and haste seems like a pretty potentially decent sword bearer to me, especially considering the on-hit effects that Rankle can bring to the table. So, if anything, it seems like he is designed best for the current Abzan builds. Even so, I'm not rushing to play him in a deck or anything, but that might be the very best place to begin iterating with this card, if you so choose. Alright, my friends, so I hope that answered everybody's questions about Rankle. If there's something that I didn't address here about the card, of course, feel free to ask here, or feel free to share an opposing view. That's totally cool. We like to encourage discussion on this channel, but those are my thoughts on Rankle. Ultimately, I don't think he's going to make the cut, but he is very, very interesting, and a difficult one to rate, admittedly, very difficult to rate. Wouldn't be surprised to see people start iterating with him, and maybe I'll be proven wrong. Who knows? But remember to stay tuned to the channel, my friends, because we've got more gameplay coming up. I've got another Rock League with my newly post-ban updated deck coming out tomorrow. We're going to keep covering the Eldraine spoilers, and we have more Rock, Abzan, possibly Jund, possibly Sultai content. Who knows? We're playing BGX all the time on this channel, though, and it's a great time to be doing so. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all patrons who make this content possible, and let me know what you think. Talk to you soon. Hope everybody has a wonderful day.